of Marshfield, Wisconsin, Tuesday, January 14th. Common Council meeting. Call to order. Roll call. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Item C, identify possible conflicts of interest. Any conflicts of interest this evening? Seeing none, moving on to item D, public comment period correspondence. At this time, I'll recognize people in attendance wishing to address the council. Upon recognition by me, persons may address the council first stating their name and address. Comments will be limited to no more than 5 minutes, and persons are asked to be respectful when addressing the council. No action will be taken regarding items not on the agenda. However, the council will take comments from the public under advisement. Please note that council members will not respond to your comments or questions. Are there any public comments? Are there any public comments? A third time, any public comments? Seeing none, move on to item E, approval of minutes from December 17th, 2024 regular meeting. We have a motion by Alderman Moorman, second by Alderman Giles. Any questions or comments? Seeing none, please vote.
Mrs. Spiros?
Yes.
Mr. Reigel?
Aye.
That motion passes. Thank you. Staff updates.
I'm not aware of any this evening.
Mayor's comments. Happy 2025, everyone, and wishing you all a great year. Council comments. Seeing none, except for right on the money there, young man. Alderman Moorman.
Thank you. I think as long as the council did their homework and read through all the consent agenda minutes tonight, there is a section in Public Works where we recently went through some policies. I wanted to call out Josh Moritz and the Public Works team, everybody who was involved in that. It is something we've talked about a lot on this council over the last 2 years, going through policies and different ordinances. It is a lot of work. I can tell you just from the 2 or 3 that we looked at really in depth, it was a lot. But I think it is definitely needed. I made a recommendation to Josh when they have time, and I would like to see the rest of the city do this at some point, that we create some sort of matrix with all of our policies and set maybe some sort of time going forward where you say we review these quarterly or monthly or something like that, depending on the policy itself. So, but I did want to give them a huge shout out. It was a lot to go through and they did some great work on that.
Thank you, Derek, and thank you, team. Obviously, that is super great. City Administrator's update.
Thank you, Mayor. I've suddenly developed a tickle in my throat right before the meeting, so if I cough or struggle for a second, that's why. It hasn't cleared itself out. I want to start by just welcoming Stanford Health to the city of Marshfield. I think many of you have heard that the merger with Marshfield Clinic took place. It's been finalized as of the first of the year, and they were here meeting with some people about a week ago. But they're a strong health organization out of Sioux Falls, and we want to welcome them, and we're glad to have them as part of our community along with Marshfield Clinic as they merged. Also, a couple things. The team that's meeting to review the Weinbrenner responses to the RFQ had a meeting on Friday, just letting you know that they're narrowing the field in terms of candidates that we may want to roll up our sleeves and work with on the redevelopment of that historic property on the west end of downtown. We'll keep you posted as that goes along. And then just to note that the CIP process, Capital Improvement Program, will begin soon here, and you won't be seeing it at the council level until the spring, but we just want you to know that we're, it seems like finances between the Capital Improvement Plan and the budget carry year round. So you'll be looking forward to seeing some of our larger projects coming at you as we get into spring for your consideration. That's all I have this evening.
Thank you, City Administrator Berg. Item J, reports from commissions, boards, and committees. Seeing none, moving on to item K, consent agenda. Meeting. Okay, I apologize. Again. Go ahead.
Thank you,
Alderman Tompkins.
Yeah, thank you. Just a little from the Parks and Rec Committee, we did relook at the park policy that just reminds people that our parks are a smoke-free zone for vaping and tobacco. That's just a policy that we have. It came up because last summer there was a big dance recital in Columbia Park, and someone was in the second bench while all these families are watching their kids and smoking while everyone's in the performance. So the policy hasn't changed at all, but it's just a reminder to the public to just be kind to your neighbor. And in those green spaces in the park, just let kids be kids and let people, have good air to breathe. But on parking lots and sidewalks, people can definitely smoke or vape. But what came out of that discussion is we did realize that Winslow Plaza and Columbia Park don't have signs. And so that would be helpful for people because then they could point to a sign and say, hey, this is a smoke-free zone. So just as an update for the public.
Thank you, Natasha. Now on to item K, consent agenda, meeting minutes and reports. Okay, and I don't have anything up except showing this. So this was not my fault. Motion by Werman, second by Stauber. Any questions, comments? Seeing none, please vote.
Mrs. Spiros?
Yes.
Mr. Reigel?
Aye.
That motion passes. Thank you. We can dispense with item L because there's no action to be moved. Item M, presentation, financial management plan, introduced by Jennifer Solinsky, Finance Director, presented by Kayla Thorpe Ellers.
Good evening. For the past few months, I've been working with Kayla Thorpe from Ellers on our financial management plan, and we have a draft ready to present to you this evening. So with that, I will turn it over to Kayla.
Thank you, everybody, and thanks for having me and allowing me to attend remotely. I'm based out of our Waukesha, Wisconsin office, and so my 3-year-old really appreciates that I'm able to be home tonight and not necessarily on the road. But over the past few months, I've been working along with Jennifer and Steve on the city's financial management plan. The last major update to this plan took place in 2022, and obviously a lot has changed since that time. And so we did a broad scope update to the plan, in addition to modeling out debt issuances to fund the CIP project and updated the TID cash flows to give you an understanding of where the financial position of each of the city's TIDs currently lies. And so I can share my screen so we can kind of all be on the same page at the same time. Some of the objectives that we take when we enter a long-range planning session is really putting together what are the past 5 years of expenditures and revenues, and really develop a data trend sense to understand what are the trends that are happening with both revenues and expenditures and how those trends are going to affect future capacity and future budgets. We take the capital projects plan as provided to us by city staff and model out debt issuances to understand what the property tax impact on that will be. We then take the trends of the past performance of the general fund and then project that forward on a 5-year basis, really to flag any levy gaps, but also really get an understanding of, in the future, what your current cost of services could be. We project out tax rates, identify some levy limit impacts, and we'll show you kind of how the next 5 years of the actual levy limit worksheet will look after our analysis. We took a look at your fund balance and we did a thorough review of that as well. So we'll talk a little bit about that more in depth, specifically as it relates to the city's credit rating agency, Moody's Investor Service. And like I said, we did a TID update and some future considerations that the city council and staff can consider as they move forward throughout these plans and in implementing future budgets. Kind of the architecture of our financial management plan is really looking at tax levy supported funds. We understand the city has a number of funds, internal service funds and other enterprise funds that are not supported by property tax levy. And so for this exercise, we didn't necessarily model those out in the long term outside of the debt model because we want to understand when push comes to shove, what is the impact on the property tax levy and the tax rate to your citizens. And so that's why we really focus on that tax levy supported fund driven by the capital project fund, because that's where you're issuing your debt. Your debt is coming through those capital projects and how that all that affects the tax rate, tax levy and tax rate forecast. We then also model out an equalized value forecast, and we take a very conservative approach as we take the past 5 years of certified equalized values, certified net new construction, and some economic appreciation in there. And then we discount that and apply that moving forward. And what that does is gives you a general understanding on a very conservative basis of where you can expect your equalized values can be. We then translate that into assessed value and then project out tax breaks from there. I kind of covered all of this already, but one thing that Ellers was really focused on this year in the implementation of the financial management plan was to give you a clear picture and kind of an open book to start having discussions in a decision-making process about service levels, capital spending, and long-term financial management. We understand that the city will be seeking a potential levy limit referendum in April of this year. We did not model that in any of our models, so understanding that those discussions are happening, but I don't think it's news to anyone that municipalities across the state, not just the city of Marshfield, are experiencing levy pressure, inability to continually fund services, and the cost of services are far outweighing what levy limits allow you to do. And really, we're identifying those financial pressure points in advance of their occurrence, even though we'll see in this plan that those occurrences are within this planning period. And so this is really kind of the start or the impetus behind some of the discussions you'll be having over the next few months regarding your long-term financial health. Some of the issues that are affecting the plan moving forward is primarily inflation, and you'll hear us at Ellers talk about this all the time, and we're talking with your city staff about this, is that the rate of inflation is not keeping up with net new construction, as most of you should be aware or are aware, unless you're new to the council. Annual increases in your property tax levy is tied to net new construction and has no correlation to inflation. And unfortunately, in the last handful of years, the rate of inflation has far outpaced any type of net new construction. In the last 6 years, the state average of net new construction statewide was 1.67%. The CPI index for that same time period was 3.75%. So we're looking at almost a double on what you're allowed to increase your tax levy versus what the rate of inflation is. And that's not even taking into account remaining competitive as an employer, expanding services to meet your growing tax base and your growing needs of your citizenry, exploring alternative services. It really is a hamstring. And what you exploring the levy limit referendum are like many municipalities across the state. You're at the end of the road as far as what you can do internally to manage those increased expenses. You've run out of options. And unfortunately, again, with the way the statutes are written, your levy limit referendum is really your only option to seek a broad-based levy, property tax levy increase. In addition to some of the financial pressures you are facing, you also have a number of unfilled and unfunded positions. As of the time of this 2024 plan that we did, they're executed in 2024, there was 10 full-time positions that were currently vacant. A number of them are partially funded in the year of 2025. Some of them remain unfunded, and some of them will be eliminated in the future because there is no capacity under the current operational budget to fund those positions. And while you may have been operating with these positions for a short or intermediate amount of time, the long-term impact on having established positions go unfilled just increases the pressure put on current staff to fill those positions, leads to organizational burnout, and really is kind of a marker of it's time to make those tough decisions. It's time to really take a look at what our capacity is. And you are doing that step as far as we're concerned with the referendum, but there's other things that will have to come into play for the city really to take that long-range plan the next step forward and start implementing some of the things to have fiscal sustainability for the city. Outside of the unfilled and unfunded positions, the long-term capital plan calls for debt issuances in each of the next 5 years to finance your capital planning. The city, like 99% of the cities in Wisconsin, borrow annually to fund their capital expenditures. There's very few communities that are able to 100% cash fund capital projects. One, because of levy limits, and two, because of the cost of construction right now. And so we've modeled those out in an area to try to understand of what's going to be the annual debt service tax levy and how can we stabilize that, because an unstable debt service tax levy, which debt service is one of the only realistic exemptions to levy limits, meaning you can increase your property tax levy on an annual basis by 100% of your principal and interest payments on general obligation debt. So if this year your principal and interest payments are $300,000 and next year they're $600,000, you can increase your levy $300,000 to make those payments. Our goal in modeling your general obligation debt is really to stabilize that tax rate and not have the peaks and valleys associated with that, because that will have a direct impetus and effect on property taxes and really makes it an unstable model for your homeowners. Mortgage payments will increase to reflect escrowed property taxes, and the next year they'll decrease. It's just we like to say, let's not ride the wave, let's calm the storm. And that's the goal of modeling out these debt issuances to get an understanding of what the property tax impact actually is. And then, like I've been saying all along, is levy limits continue to pose significant challenges. And the boost in state shared revenue that municipalities receive because of Act 12 is a Band-Aid. It is not a permanent solution and does nowhere to really ride the wave of the increasing costs and inflation. These are increases, I would argue, as a former city administrator, should have been made years ago. And now for many municipalities, that Act 12 boost is a little too little and a little too late, because our financial difficulties have far exceeded what that additional revenue was. The positives that are facing the city right now, or benefiting the city, is that both counties experience positive net new construction. Wood County has a 4-year average of 1.1%, while Marathon County experiences a 4-year average of just over 5%. So those are positives, meaning you have levy capacity on an annual basis to increase because of net new construction. Now, what that boils down to in dollars amounts is pretty insignificant when we're talking about a $15 million property tax levy. But at the end of the day, you have movement, and that is really important, is to understand that you have movement on levy limits and you have movement because of net new construction, and the city should really take considerations to further that. And I've got a slide that we'll talk about, or right here, is TID creations and economic development and attracting quality businesses, and doing that through TID districts are really what's driving the growth within the community. And the community has been very great at managing new development and maximizing the impact that is having. And so that is really driving the growth within your community. Now, on the flip side, growth within the community also creates a higher demand on services. And that's kind of where the disconnect between that new construction and the cost of services ends up being. This is a snapshot of that equalized value projection model that I was looking at. This is on a TID out basis, meaning the value contained within your TID district is taken out of this model because your equalized value to create the debt service levy and all of those other projections are on a TID out basis. So just understand that this is TID out. And then we projected that forward, and we've discounted this very heavily, meaning by 75% here in the middle. We've taken your 5-year or your 4-year average, discounted that by 75%, and then applied that forward. What this basically does is kind of give you what's the worst case scenario of what we can expect growth moving forward. And that new construction value is 0.2% within Wood County, very highly unlikely. I will just point out the outlier here of the zero in net new construction in 2023. The city's overall equalized value declined between 2023 and 2024. And so not to skew future projections, we assumed that all of the net new construction within Wood County was in the TID district. And so I took it out of the TID out model as to not have a negative value in this model to kind of further prolong the problem of our projections. But we are proposing a very modest kind of 2.5 annual growth in equalized value or in Wood County. We've built in a TID closure here. There's a number of TIDs that are anticipated to close in 28 and 29, which is at the end of our planning period for the financial projection models. But this is the current value of those TIDs, understanding that there will most likely be appreciation in value between now and when those TIDs close in 28 and 29. Same philosophy with Marathon County, projecting that forward and discounting that by 75%. So what I'm doing is kind of setting the stage to how we got to where our financial analysis will be. And this is a big part of it to really drill down on what the overall impact will be on the property tax bill. Shifting gears into general obligation debt, the city has a very strong debt policy. Statutory limitations limit a municipality from having any outstanding general obligation debt in excess of 5% of their total equalized value. The city's debt policy limits that to 65% of that 5% value, which is a great policy and is a very strong credit marker to the city. The city's debt service fund shall not have a negative fund balance at year end, meaning there always should be residual funds in hand to pay debt service obligations should there be an event that happens that property tax revenues don't come in or some kind of rainy day scenario. And that long-term debt will not be issued to fund current operating costs. And this is for a number of reasons. Funding operations with debt furthers a structural deficit, meaning you're kind of just continually putting Band-Aids on issues. But it also provides a disproportionate generational equity. Today's cost of service, if you're borrowing for operational items or operational services, you can amortize debt over 20 years. That means taxpayers 20 years from now are paying for services that you're issuing today. And so we talk a lot about generational equity when we talk about the issuance of debt, what those projects are for, or what those equipment purchases are for. And I know Jennifer and I have had conversations about your internal service funds as it relates to that generational equity as well, and we'll kind of talk about that. And then matching that philosophy is that the maturities of long-term debt should really attempt to match the useful life of the piece of equipment. If it's a lawnmower that's got a 10-year useful life versus a dump truck that's 20 or 20 plus years, really matching those debt repayment schedules so that they're being amortized over what that useful life of that piece of equipment or building may be. So this is a snapshot of the city's current debt, moving from right to left, or from left to right. The city has general obligation debt and an annual of, or right now, about $58.7 million. Not all of that is paid by the property taxpayer. There's obviously, you can see here, debt associated with all of the TID districts, which are repaid by the TID revenues that are, or the increment revenues coming in on the TID. And all of those go to reduce the burden of what the property taxpayer is paying for debt service. So on an annual basis, the city is levying about $4 million for debt service payments alone. And on an equalized value basis, the debt tax rate per thousand is in 2025 was $2.36. So every $1,000 of assessed value of your house or equalized value of your house, you're paying $2.36 towards the city's general obligation debt. This is a snapshot of the debt issuances from 2025 through 2029 to fund the city's CIP. Obviously, 25 and 26 are heavier years with about $9 million debt issuances, primarily driven by police expenditures and the street program, but also that 2027 through 2029 capital improvement plans have not yet been solidified, finalized, still in flux, still projects being proposed. So really close to pay attention to, we'll be issuing debt this year and then kind of mitigating how are we going to move forward on those debt issuances. These are using assumed rates and assumed cost of issuances to try to get an understanding of what the end result will be on the property taxpayer. And that's really modeled in this. It takes your existing debt and then adds in the annual principal and interest payments on any new debt. And then what is that impact and what's the levy change on an annual basis? Our goal, like I mentioned before, is to stabilize the property tax levy as it relates to debt service and wrap new debt service payments around the city's existing debt, specifically when debt starts to fall off. And that's where you kind of see this column here, is that we are phasing in principal and interest payments on an annual basis to really have about a $200,000 per year increase in the levy. And then you will see in 2031 that debt starts to drop off pretty quickly. That also corresponds with the end of our planning period and the end of our CIP, knowing that the future years debt service payments related with any CIPs of 2030 through 2035 will have the ability to be wrapped around and really kind of aim towards that $200,000 increase and prolong that into the future. Again, to stabilize the tax rate, and as you can see, there's very little fluctuation in the anticipated tax rate as it relates to debt service, but the way that we were able to structure it. That is one way that the city can work with Ellers and work with finance staff to really at least have one portion of the levy that can be stabilized. That's something that the city can control. And this is just a graphical representation of where the city's debt policy, along with the statutory debt policy, fall and where you currently are. So the orange line is the statutory debt limit, which is 5% of your equalized value. The teal line is your internal debt policy. And then the blue chart or the blue block is existing principal, and green is new principal. So you can see that even with the additional borrowings in the next planning period, which is 25 through 29, you are still well below your internal policy of 65% of debt capacity. Shifting now into general and operating funds, just to review kind of the methodology we take. What you won't see on the backside of this is we project on a line item basis, meaning every revenue line and every expenditure line has assumptions applied to it. You will see the summary, but just know that we've taken a pretty in-depth look on a line item basis to get the most accurate and knowledgeable projections that we could get. We've made a number of assumptions along with your staff and consulting as kind of what are your regional trends, what are some anticipated trends. And for the most part, and this is what we do in most of our financial management plan operations, is we keep non-levy revenue sources flat. Primarily because the ability to increase non-property tax revenues is little to none, because it's just fees and special charges. And the trends will show that most municipalities do not increase those significantly on an annual basis. And so therefore, to try to drill down what an end-all be-all levy need is, we keep those projections flat. We then take all of the projected expenditures, and we'll walk through kind of what the expenditure methodology was, take out, kind of solve to the levy need, meaning expenditures minus non-property tax revenues gets us to what our property tax levy needs to be. We then apply that to what our allowable levy would be under levy limits. And so as of 1/1/24, the net new construction added just $112,000 to your allowable levy. And so, yes, that is a lot of money. It's over $100,000. But understand you have a $23 million operating budget. And so when we talk about just the rate of inflation alone is applied to a $23 million operating budget, $112,000 is nowhere near what would be needed to sustain those services moving forward. Our expenditure methodology groups expenditures into a number of different categories: commodities, employee insurance, meaning health, dental, and life, insurance on a property and liability side, services and wages. Most of these had a 5% annual increase factor, while employee insurance had a 4.5%. This is hedging on the higher side, where on our equalized value projections, we were being super conservative. We would rather be more liberal in our expense projections to give kind of what's that doomsday scenario, what could a potential levy gap look like if our expenditures are growing at the rate they have been growing or the rate we're expecting them to grow. And so this is kind of the culmination of that effort to understand of what the property tax levy needs to be, what what it was in 24, what we're projecting it would need to be in 25 through 29, is really showing about a $2 million per year annual increase in the property tax levy needed to sustain your current services. That does not take into account expansion of services. That does not take into account any new programs and services, any filling of any of those 10 positions, adding of new 10 positions, whatever that may be. This is just a snapshot of your current financial picture moving forward. We broke this down by county as well, because there are differing values and kind of assessment values per county. And so we boiled that down to what would be the annual tax rate and what would be the annual change. Now, while $2 million seems like a lot of money, when we take a look at what that annual change would be between, let's take Wood County, between the 2025 property tax bill that you guys just received in the mail versus hypothetically next year, would be $89.54. I've built in a declining assessment ratio, and then in 2030, outside of this planning ratio, a reval. So obviously that, if you have a full reval earlier than that, that will also play effect into this picture. But for this exercise, we have a declining assessment ratio. And so really manageable on the impact side of it, that adding property tax levy could be mitigated on the impact. What it can't be mitigated on is on the levy limit side. And so as we talked about, levy limits your ability to increase the property tax levy on an annual basis to net new construction or zero if there are none. The most commonly used exemption is general obligation debt. There is another adjustment that the city utilizes regarding the Marshfield Clinic agreement and the chargeback of refunded and rescinded taxes, but really provides no flexibility for inflation or inflationary factors affecting the city. And I'll kind of skip through some of these introductory sides, but your operating funds that are supported by property tax levy are subject to levy limits, and general obligation debt is not. There is no limit outside of that 5% of what you could levy to pay general obligation debt. And so while we can mitigate the impact on the property taxpayer, what we can't do is create levy capacity. And the long and short of it, of what I really want to point out here, is the bottom half of this graph. Currently, with our financial projections and with our equalized value projections, the city's allowable levy is significantly lower than what the levy need is showing to be. Starting in next year, we are showing a $1.3 million levy deficit, meaning you will have $1.3 million of expenditures that you cannot legally increase the property tax levy for. And that can remain constant throughout the planning period. PID closures that are modeled in 28 and 29 help that and get that to a little bit below $1 million, but at this point in time, or just around $1 million, but at this point in time, there's no other options really outside of that levy limit referendum that the city is exploring to increase the property tax levy at all. These projections do not include that levy limit referendum. Should that be successful, we can absolutely update this model and run that analysis to see what that would be. But the understanding really needs to start to be a focus is that our current pace of operations, our current pace of expenditures have reached a tipping point at which is unsustainable. And you are not alone. I work in a number of communities and do the SMPs, and this is the same message that we're giving to all our clients. We are now 20 years into levy limits. 2026 marks the first, or 2006 was the first budget year in which levy limits were enacted. So after 20 years of finding ways to make it work, the options have run out. And so you are not alone on the levy limit referendum side, and you are not alone in this levy deficit side as well. There is residual debt capacity, meaning all of that debt that is paid for by the PID district technically could be levied. And we'll talk about kind of what that could be used for, but cannot, should not be used to fund operations. It could be used to fund capital purchases and capital projects, but really, really, really cannot be used to fund operations, because I mentioned before, you will just be creating a larger deficit that is kind of kicking the can down the road if you plug a levy gap with what we call residual or abated debt capacity. There's some ongoing budget tools and considerations that the city staff and council can definitely take, is really set some objectives and priorities. So what could be a manageable impact on taxpayers? Explore new revenue generating services and initiatives. And I know this is something that the city has discussed and worked on in various different iterations over the last handful of years. Really contemplate if there are any permissible decreases in current service levels. And one way to do that is really engaging with your community and your tax base and understanding of where their demands are, where their wants are, and kind of surveying as to what services are of priority or are of lesser priority. Prioritize capital projects and planning for that, which I think the city does a really good job of, and we've assisted in the modeling of the debt to kind of get an understanding of what that's going to be. Acceptable debt financing levels is something that the city is already kind of exploring. And then really any non-property tax revenue sources, whether it's new fees for services, increase of fees for services, all those types of things. If there's anything that can be charged as a special charge versus included in the levy, all of those are considerations that the city can explore and has been exploring, but it's just something to highlight as you kind of digest this information and then move forward into discussing what options are available for you to kind of mitigate the 2027 budget. In terms of fund balance, we wanted to spend a little time talking about what fund balance is, where the city currently is, and where it is in relation to the credit rating agency's thresholds. There are a number of different fund balance categories as we outlined here. Committed, assigned, and unassigned are all unrestricted. And you will see these in your annual financial statements. They're usually at kind of the last page that designates where your cash on hand is. Non-spendable and restricted is not actual physical cash. It's either checks that have been issued that have not been cashed yet, or they are assets, meaning a piece of equipment, whatnot. Committed, assigned, and unassigned are where you have the flexibility to move funds, but for all intents and purposes, the only thing that should be of main focus in any type of discussion is unassigned. That is your liquid cash on hand in your savings account. When we talk about uses of fund balance, because we have a lot of communities that will say, well, can we just use fund balance to get us by until we can make a tough decision, or can we just use fund balance to kind of smooth out a tax impact? And while you can do that, it really is not of a financial benefit to the city or puts the city in a strong financial position for a number of reasons. One, because it's just, again, kicking the can down the road and building in a bigger structural deficit. And by structural deficit, I'm talking about like an inherent underfunding of services that just compounds annually if you're using fund balance to plug those services. Where you can use fund balance, and it makes financial sense, is to bridge a cash flow need, whether that's on a property tax collection basis where you have obligations that are due before you get your full property tax settlement. Any unanticipated revenue shortfalls and cost overruns. This is a huge factor we'll talk about with Moody's and any credit rating agency, specifically post-COVID. Pay for emergency expenses, capital projects or equipment purchases, debt reduction, and any non-reoccurring. Basically, any one-time expense, any one-time unanticipated bill, you can use fund balance for, but really need to have then a plan of how we are going to replenish that in the next fiscal year. This gives you a snapshot of where the city's current unassigned fund balance is in relation to Moody's unrestricted target and the city's policy. The city currently has a policy of an unassigned fund balance of between 25 and 30% of expenditures on an annual basis. Moody's unrestricted target is between 30 and 40%. And this gives you kind of the snapshot that as of year-end audit 2023, you're at 26%. Our projections of year-end 24 put you at 23%. That kind of levels out through time. Jennifer and I had a long conversation this week about fund balance. The city has a very healthy target of 25 to 30%. You will see if you've read through the city's most recent credit rating or read through any type of credit rating for any agency, Moody's targets are increasing and increasing significantly. I said a Moody's released today for the same credit rating as the town that had a credit positive, meaning it's a credit strength if the community could have a fund balance near 60%, and would be a credit negative, meaning could lead to a downgrade if the fund balance falls below 25%. So understanding that credit ratings play into interest rates, but also this is a regional marker for Moody's, and there is very little to no consideration that Wisconsin is a property tax reliant state, and that a 60% fund balance is an unrealistic target for any municipality because that means you are taxing people and keeping that in a fund balance really just to make Moody's and any credit rating agencies threshold markers. It's really you need to weigh the pros and cons of what your fund balance policy is. I am very supportive of the city's fund balance policy, and we at Ellers are very supportive of our clients' fund balance policies in the amount of 25 to 30, or some of your are even 25 to 40%. That is healthy, that is realistic, and that does not lead to questions of taxing to keep it in savings. And so we just wanted you to get eyes on this, get an understanding of while the city is under the credit rating thresholds, some of those thresholds are completely unrealistic given Wisconsin's unique status as a property tax reliant state. Some considerations when it comes to Moody's and fund balance is maintaining the current credit rating means not dipping below where the city currently is, meaning no unexpected draws on fund balance that are not replenished or a plan to replenish those. And really stabilizing that percentage annually. And I know Jennifer has done a great job of this since she has come on board with the city of really enacting this policy and then stabilizing this. And it may be difficult for some people to understand whether it's the public or businesses as to what that policy is and why 25% is a necessary kind of savings account. But it really is a financial benefit to the city and protects the city and gives the city flexibility if there are any kind of extraordinary circumstances like COVID. The reason why Moody's thresholds are increasing to the 60% is because they have noticed that communities had significant draws on fund balance when COVID hit prior to any federal funds being released. And so the ability for municipalities to have the cash on hand and not have to go borrow for that in an emergency really is bolstering Moody's philosophy of those higher fund balances. But I don't think it's something that the city should really consider at this point in time. Obviously, there's not financial standing to do that, but I also don't think it's realistic for any municipality to do that. If there are draws or uses of fund balance, they really should be, according to the city policy, replenished within that 1 to 3 year time frame. And that the percentages are still healthy and still do fall within Moody's ranges. It's just that Moody's ranges are going to be far outpacing what any municipality in Wisconsin will be able to do. Now, kind of wrapping up in its entirety of what are some of the things we've learned from this process and what are some things that the city can do moving forward, is that not only has inflation caused budgetary pressures, those are at a head point where something needs to be discussed now. And how are we as your consultants and how are we as city staff and the council going to address those financial pressures now that we know that they're here and they're not going away? And those things like we've talked about is look for those additional revenue sources, increasing the stormwater utility fees, the wheel tax, the street light charge, all of those kind of alternative revenue streams that are gaining popularity in Wisconsin. A levy limit referendum, which you guys are already planning for in April. A broad scope community survey to get an understanding if there's any support for levy services that could be reduced or eliminated. Continue to work on identifying ways to balance your general fund budget in the future, and continue with this long range planning because we can adjust on an annual basis methodology, projections, scope, anything to kind of work along with your staff and with you to identify immediate impacts of any programs or services that may increase, decrease, or change. And the big driver that will be of immediate benefit to the city is to continue to promote economic development, as that is a direct correlation to net new construction, and that is the direct correlation to allowable levy increases. And then just a good financial health thing to do is annually review your financial policies and see if they fit with your current financial environment and make any adjustments as necessary. We have reviewed, along with your staff, your financial policies, and have kind of did a deep dive into some of them and really have no recommendations at this point in time. There's the only thing we have discussed, I think it was when I first started at Ellers a year and a half ago, was the internal service fund charges and how those are providing that generational equity. And I know that's something that Jennifer and Steve are exploring on how to right size in the future. I'm not going to go through all this PID cash flows. I just put them in here as supplementary information so you guys can get an understanding. We've tied out everything to your 2023 audit, and then have applied all the assumptions that staff has provided us to give you an understanding of when a projected closure date is. These are just projected. It is a simple formula as to when the cumulative fund balance could meet the outstanding obligations of the district. This doesn't mean those districts are required to close at that point in time. It's just a simple calculation of a formula. So that's really all I have for you. I know I spent a lot of time going through that and kind of went through a ton of information, but I'm happy to answer any questions or go back through anything if anybody would have any misunderstandings or questions.
Thank you, Kayla. Alderman Tompkins has a question.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you so much, first of all, for doing this work. This is just so helpful for us. So what I'm hearing big picture from you is that even if we don't spend any more money because of the cost of inflation, next year we're going to be $1.3 million in the hole. Is that what I heard? You said our levy deficit will be 1.3 million in 2025.
Yeah, that is also with our revenue projection or our expenditure projections, which are about a 5% annual increase. And so holding revenues, non-property tax revenues flat, there can be some consideration that they would increase. Just for modeling purposes, we don't. But regardless of the offset of bringing down the expense projections and increasing the non-property tax revenue, there still will be a levy gap next year. And it's kind of an exercise that staff goes through every year of kind of, okay, we don't have levy capacity. What can we shift? What can we move? But it's getting to a point where those options have run out. So yes, there is going to be a levy gap next year, whether that's 1.3 or we can whittle it down to 500,000, whatever it may be, there will be a gap.
Okay, that's kind of depressing. Okay, and then the last is you said that we would need $2 million every year to maintain our services. Like average, I guess. That's
what our model is projecting based on those 5% annual increases year over year. And so if we look at 2026, we're projecting, let's just say a blanket 5% in all of your general fund expenditures. And then the next year, we're projecting another 5%. That equates to a compounding $2 million annual levy need. Also, what the understanding is that that is keeping non-property tax revenues flat, meaning all of that need is falling onto the levy. If there's any movement one way on non-property tax revenues, that will reduce that levy need. But in hypothetical stance of in our model, it's $2 million.
Thank you.
Any other comments, questions? Alderman Stauber?
I echo Tompkins' comments, compliments. Thank you very much for the work from Ellers and staff. So kind of an odd list of questions here, but I'm kind of curious, why does staffing and the staffing shortages come into the conversation? I'm just thinking of it in terms of accounting. Go.
So for a number of reasons, one of the non-financial impact of staffing shortages and the effect that it has on your current staff. And two, the financial impact of increased overtime charges, increased charges as it relates to hazard pay, or if there's any on duty injuries related to kind of working through projects under staff, whatever they may be. There are some financial implications to that, but the broader base is that your budget's not set up to fund those positions that have historically been funded for the city, and that's an impact on your current staff to perform all of those current services and duties with 10 less people than has historically been doing that. The financial impact really is on public safety. I think there were 2 firefighter EMT positions that are unfunded in your position, in your budget, and that is a large draw on overtime funds and duty injury funds and kind of all of those things that go into same or increased level of services and less people doing that.
Okay, the next question I have is tax revenue. And again, I'm not trying to question the experts, but I brought up the 25 proposed budget. And between Wood County and Marathon County, we had a tax revenue estimate of $12.5 million. And on page 18 of the PowerPoint presentation, it was $15.6 million. And I tried to save the most recent, go ahead, I just need an explanation of why I see that gap. The payment in lieu of taxes is making up the difference. Okay, thanks for that answer. And then also related to revenue, early in the presentation, Kayla, you said that, the focus was on tax generated revenue. And what came to mind for me are, enterprise funds, which you mentioned. We have an EMS fund. And so when I'm looking again at the, revenue sources for the city of Marshfield, 50% are taxes, 38% are intergovernment revenues, and I'm not quite sure where EMS funds fall on this pie chart. But my question is, sometimes these revenue sources are kind of connected, if you will, and just, in simple terms, if you look at the EMS fund as an example, we have a service, but the service requires equipment and personnel. So, with the EMS fund, we have the ability to increase the fees, but we also are using tax dollars, I think, to cover equipment and possibly personnel. In other words, if we didn't have such a robust EMS fund, operation, would it be any relief to the tax burden is kind of where I'm going with this. You follow that line?
And Jennifer might be able to provide, go ahead. Jennifer might be able to provide a little more context, but the EMS fund is actually a separate fund in which consolidates those revenues and expenditures and is not supported by property tax levy.
And I guess,
and so any revenue.
No, go ahead. I'm sorry. I want to follow up with that on that, Kayla. Go ahead and finish your thought. Sorry.
And while there may be expenditures contained within the general fund that are related to EMS, anything can, like fees that are associated with the EMS fund stay in the EMS fund and don't come back to the general fund.
Okay, and then back to my initial question, you said the focus was on taxes as a revenue. And the city of Marshfield is, operates on, 50% of the revenues for the city are taxes. Intergovernment revenues, 38%. So how does this connect? EMS revenue and intergovernment and the study that Ehlers did, which seems to focus just on tax revenue.
Correct. The EMS fund is in, those revenues and expenditures are outside of the general fund. This analysis primarily focused on the general fund. So in the EMS, all of the fees generated from providing the ambulance service are recorded there. Also, maybe you're thinking of firefighter EMT as being a interchangeable job. We allocate a certain number of headcount into that fund. And then all of the expenditures that they need to operate, as well as their capital, is paid from that fund. The only exception to that is the EMS fund is allocated a share of the debt that was taken out to build the facility. That was part, in the past, their fees were paying for that, but given their negative cash, significant negative cash in prior years, we have levied for that for 2 years. So that is, it is general obligation debt. So if the enterprise fund cannot make its payments, then we're obligated to levy for that. So that's the situation that we're in. And that is how, at this current time, the taxpayer is supporting the EMS fund, is that portion of their principal and interest payments that have been allocated for the building.
Any idea what that percentage is?
It's roughly $170,000 of the roughly $5 million that is levied for debt service.
And using the EMS as just one example of funds outside of taxes, then the gloomy picture that we're hearing, I guess, for lack of better terms, isn't as gloomy if you factor in the 180,000 generated from EMS.
They're not in a position where they're generating cash enough where I would feel comfortable to not levy for that. That debt does get paid off in 2029, so we're nearing the end of that situation with the EMS fund.
Okay. And then one final question, and this might be more for the administrator, but when you look at our success in tax incremental districts, or success, and it's getting a little off topic, but success in economic development, where would the thank you be for that? And I'm thinking it'd be the administrator, because a lot of what we're seeing in these tax incremental districts is really direct contact to you. But is there more to it that we're not seeing as far as how that's all occurring?
I think the tax increment success we've seen over the years has been a combination. It's certainly involved councils and mayors' support of the creation of the districts and wise spending, within those districts. The investments we made have been good. Some communities have maybe abused TIF in some ways, and that's caused the state of Wisconsin to rein in some of the use of it and put more restrictions on. I don't think we've done that. Finance Director Jennifer done a great job, and the Joint Review Board's been a big part of it. They've been very supportive. The school district, Mid-State, the county, they've also been there to help us and give us time for some of these districts to pay off. So I think it's been a total team effort, and I think we've done very well. And you can see it in the districts. None of them are in really bad shape. And I know there are a lot of communities that have some that are never going to make it financially to the finish line. They're not going to pay off, even with a maximum number of years. So it's been a collective work. And I want to commend Ehlers. Ehlers came on board, I think, with us about 5 years ago, and we had some struggles we were working through, and their staff has just been marvelous to work with.
Okay, thank you.
I'd like to make one other comment if I could too, kind of dovetailing, if you don't mind, Kayla, on your answer about the impact on staffing. You mentioned overtime and some other things, but the other potential impact from staffing shortages over time, and I'm going to use public works and engineering as a poster child, if you will. There's a point where if you don't have the staff, you are in fact going to be contracting out with other entities to do the work that you could have done in-house. So that's another impact over time with not having the staffing level that you need.
Any other comments, questions for Kayla? Otherwise, Kayla, once again, thank you and glad you didn't have to travel this evening. Have a great rest of your night.
I appreciate it. Thank you all for your time.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you.
Yes,
Item N.
bye-bye.
First reading of ordinance number 1525, amending chapter 15 to 18 of Marshfield Municipal Code, property maintenance, presented by Harold Wolfgram, City Attorney.
We had this reading previously in regard to this amendment, and it's pretty straightforward. We were trying to bring this up to be consistent with the code, state statute. And those changes that are identified there are, are obvious in the document itself. So if there's questions, fine, but otherwise we've seen this before. And it was something that was requested previously by the Department of Public Works.
No action in 2 weeks from this evening. Reading and adoption set for, obviously, January 28th. Thank you, Attorney Wolfgram. Item O, request to approve budget resolution number 01-2025, transferring $47,000 from general fund contingency to Fund 205 Economic Development for payment of funds related to cost sharing for Mackey's Business Development Director position. A motion to approve this item failed on a 2-2 vote at the January 7th Finance, Budget and Personnel Committee meeting, and a request to add this item to the January 14th council agenda was made by council members Fire and Stauber, presented by Steve Barg, City Administrator.
Thank you, Mayor. And just to dovetail on what you read in the agenda language, when a motion doesn't pass, it doesn't come in through the consent agenda or it doesn't go on as a regular item in this case. But we've had this happen before. Our practice has been with 2 members of the council making a written request. If they, especially in this case, they're not on the Finance, Budget, and Personnel Committee, and with the blessing of the mayor, it gets added to the next agenda. We ran that past the city attorney as well. So anyway, kind of what we have going on, if you think back to the budget process, a lot of talk about whether the city would continue its longstanding, engagement with Mackey in terms of funding a portion of the pay and benefits for the Business Development Director position. The council ultimately had agreed to continue that practice and put $47,000 in the budget, but ultimately it was put in a contingency, however, and it was decided that because Mackey does not have a business development director as of January 1st, so therefore it wouldn't be a full year. The money would be put in contingency so that at the time that someone is hired and on board in that position, the city could then prorate its payment for the remainder of 2025 accordingly. In December, I had a request from Denise Sonneman on behalf of herself and the board at Mackey saying, we'd really like to have something written on this because as we go into the potential of advertising, recruiting for the position, the prospect that the council would have to come back in 2025 and approve a budget resolution to move the monies from contingency to the proper account to spend them, just one more thing that could potentially be debated and perhaps not approved. So with that in mind, we did bring a budget resolution 01-2025 to the Finance, Budget, and Personnel on January 7th. And as the mayor mentioned at that time, there was considerable debate. Ultimately, the vote was 2-2, and therefore the motion failed. So what you have before you tonight is a resolution, budget resolution 01-2025, the purpose of which would be to move $47,000 from contingency to the 205 Economic Development Fund so that if in fact or when Mackey would hire a business development director, the city would then be authorized to make those payments toward that position accordingly, once again prorated based upon the amount of the year remaining. And it is before you tonight as discretion of the council.
And we have a motion on the floor by Alderman Fire, second by Alderman Varsho. Alderman Tompkins.
Thank you. So I just want to clarify a few things just so I understand sort of the timeline. Originally, this was in the budget. We took it out of the budget. When I made the motion to take it out of the budget, I asked for it to be put in the 502 fund, 205 fund. But we couldn't do that at the budget meeting. So it was taken out of the budget, sort of with the understanding that we would use the money when it was needed. Then the request to put it into the Economic Development Fund failed. Now, in order for a budget resolution to happen, you need 7 people. In order for money to come out of the Economic Development Fund, how many votes do you need for that? Is that a majority?
In fact, when at the time that let's say you move the money to the 205 Economic Development Fund, and I hear from Denise that they've hired somebody, they're going to start on, I'll make this up, April 1st. We would be empowered because you would have put it in the Economic Development Fund with the intent, purpose, and already prescribed purpose of spending for that purpose. So you wouldn't see it again. So that we'd just be empowered once what's there. We've got your authority to begin notifying you and begin spending those funds. The 7, and that's part of the reason I think that Mackie might be concerned. Budget resolutions requiring 7 affirmative votes is a higher bar than a simple majority. And that's what's before you this evening for your approval.
Okay, and then I just have one more question. Would this have been easier if this had been a contract? And I guess this is a question for Hap. Like in the future, when this comes up, because this is going to come up every single year in our budget, would this be easier to say, we are having a contract with this outside organization to do this stuff for us? Then does it even, then it's already a contract signed, it has to be in the budget. You can't take it out of the budget because we did a contract.
That's actually a complex question, because if we were contracted to do it, the reason that you budgeted for it this way is that they don't have someone in a position that what we're paying for. So if we had a contract that we're paying for them and they don't have that person in there, we'd be obligated to pay them even though they might not be able to perform that service. Contract might be able to address that, which would say then we aren't going to pay you during the time that you don't have that position. So the answer is yes, but it might be complex. But you could set it up that you're going to pay under a contract. Is it easier? I think that's subjective. It's kind of hard to tell.
Okay.
And you would lose, it depends on how long you're doing it. If you do it on an annual contract, you probably land in the same place.
Okay, thank you.
Alderman Stauber?
Okay, so the first thing, minor thing, but it's at the discretion of the council, but actually the recommendation from staff is to approve the resolution.
Well, it would be very difficult with the committee having tied 2-2, and that's how it got here by request for this staff to make that recommendation. I believe I did make the recommendation back on January 7th for approval.
That's correct, yeah.
But it would seem, and I think I may have even talked about this with the city attorney, to make a recommendation for approval, considering how it got to this point tonight.
Okay.
It doesn't mean I've changed my mind about how I view the topic.
Right,
doesn't mean I've changed my mind on how I view this topic. It just reflects the way to present an item that's requested by 2 council members.
Clear what the motion is? We have a motion, and just so that it's clear what that motion is for.
Yes, I will. Alderman Farrer, what would your motion be this evening? Oh, thank you. To approve the resolution. And Alderman Varsher, are you seconding that motion?
Yes.
Okay, and then you have a comment?
Yeah.
Mr.
Bard.
If I could,
Sorry.
but I just
I'm afraid, I'm sorry.
Sorry.
wanted to finish up.
Okay.
That was my first
Yeah.
of 20 questions, so.
Oh, didn't know.
Sorry. So just thoughts running through my head regarding Mackie and our support, financial support. We had heard that there was some economic development activity that potentially was going to be occurring at the Marshfield utility. I would like to, get an update on that to identify possible, overlapping of emissions, if you will. The second question, without this position being filled, which tasks are falling to the wayside and which, of those tasks, which ones are maybe falling on you, Steve, or other people, or which ones are being neglected entirely? And then there was some discussion about return on investment metrics to measure that. And I don't recall where that part of the request or the conversation went. So that's all I have.
I'll try to take the last 2 of the 3, and then maybe I'll look to our representatives on the council who serve on that Utilities Commission for maybe an update as far as the position they've been working on, or at least discussing. With respect to what would fall, what would we lose? I think the biggest services, and the Mackie Business Development Director performs a lot of important services that benefit the city and work really well with staff. The biggest, and I think I said this at Finance, Budget, and Personnel, are the ones related to business retention activities, because that's time consuming, and it's something that city staff never really had much, even when we had the staff here, much time for that type of activity. And another one is entrepreneurial assistance, working with people trying to start a business or to grow a business planning through SCORE. Again, that's a very valuable service that I don't think anybody else has been providing, and it's important to try and help new business get started. This person does other things too, a lot of valuable things in terms of trying to incentivize business, going to trade shows, trying to help recruit in other ways, but those are probably the most significant in my mind. What was your third question? I had it memorized before I started talking.
I have so many questions, I forgot. ROI. And,
ROI.
Yeah, and then the utility overlap.
Yeah, I'll come back to utility in a minute. I'm sorry, I forgot that. But the ROI thing, I mean, is difficult to gauge. I know that when Karen was in the position until December 31st, she made appearances here before where people would say to her, how many businesses have you brought to town? How many businesses have you been responsible for expanding? It's a really hard thing to say. I'll speak as if Karen were here. I think she would say something to the effect of, you work with businesses, sometimes they stay here, sometimes they pick Point or Rapids or somewhere else. And other times it's hard to tell if you were really the catalyst or if it was some other part of the process that led them to the table. Maybe the city's staff, or maybe somebody else was the one that helped to get them across the finish line. So trying to say what the business development director is worth in terms of what they produced is a little bit hard to get your arms around. But I believe the position is valuable, especially where we sit today, but in general, because there are people who don't always want to come to City Hall. You know, they might be concerned about open records and public meetings and stuff like that. And they like to start with somebody else when they're looking at opening business. You know, I leave it to you to decide whether or not this has the punch that you're looking for.
And regarding the utility, I don't know if anyone who sits on that utility commission wants to speak with that, you know, economic development activity, creating a position. Like get it up.
I mean, I can't completely read the minds of everyone, but I will say that once the city eliminated it from its budget, that position was no longer on the agenda. So I can privately infer why I think that is, but it seems like that, yeah. So basically, it's no longer being talked about.
And you can confer, Mike?
Excuse me. Yeah, I would say the same. There hasn't been discussion, but as far as I know, it is still moving forward. There haven't been any detailed conversations that I'm aware of. I'll expand a little bit on, unless someone else needs the floor. I had my button pushed, so I'll just roll into that if it's okay.
Is that okay with you? Thank you.
I will also say that you had mentioned the SCORE program. Mm-hmm. That was very beneficial to my business, and they do a good job with getting that going. It's an important thing in the community and a good resource for the people. There's a lot of questions on the return on investment, and I think that discussion definitely needs to continue. But at the point we're at right now, I look at it and we don't have an economic person at the utility. We do not have an economic person here. And we got rid of the Economic Development Board, and here we sit, and now we're looking at eliminating this one. I'm all for discussions about whether we continue this, but I think eliminating this at this point is self-destructive. We just heard from Ellers how important economic development is. And by their analysis, that's we're doing well with it. Under my analysis, I don't believe we are. I think we can do a lot better, and we need to do a lot better if we're going to retain the services we have and continue to offer them. So I guess I will leave it at that.
Okay, and next will be, did you not want, Brian? Okay, and then Alderman Weigel.
There we go. It's off. Just to make sure that we're on the same page and we're talking about the same thing here. Just to confirm, what's currently here is just transferring the money out of a contingency fund to the 205 fund. No one here is discussing whether we should no longer fund this position. Is that correct?
Yeah, that would be correct. It's putting it in a position where it can be expended without any further approval from you, as if it was a regular budgeted item apart from contingency, effectively.
Right, so once again, just to state it, so we're clear here, so we're not getting mixed up. No one's talking about not funding this position. We're talking about moving it from one fund to another.
I understand. I know that we had that conversation at Finance, Budget, and Personnel, and I understand what you're saying.
Right, and you obviously were there, so you know exactly where I'm going with this, Steve. And so I'll repeat it again then for those who weren't there or those who didn't decide to watch a fun-filled video from last Tuesday. I understand Mackey's concern, and just so I'm not stating this stuff for myself, what is Mackey's concern?
Mackey's concern, as I understand it, is just having less than 100% certainty that, in fact, when the time comes that they bring someone on board, that the city is a financial participant in that position, based upon the fact that needing another step before this body, especially one that requires more than a normal majority, may not happen for some reason. I described it at the Finance, Budget, and Personnel Committee as kind of the chicken and the egg. I get exactly what you're saying, and yet I think they're looking at it the reverse, that they might bring somebody on board and then find that there is no financial commitment from the city.
Right, so, and I understand that, but then my question still remains, and this is the third time I'm asking, I feel bad asking you this, Mr. Barr, because you're not the one proposing this, but you're the one fielding the question. What does this solve? Because the way I see it here is that if we do this and then it gets expended, there's nothing preventing us 3 months down the road to pass another budget resolution withdrawing this money again. Could we not?
Yeah, I imagine you could do any number of things at that point, even short of passing a budget resolution. You could, stop spending of the item with a motion as well. I never contemplated that would happen. I certainly can't sit here and say that it's not possible. I mean, councils make decisions all the time to stop spending on something that's been budgeted before if they think that financially and otherwise it's not prudent.
Right, no, exactly. That's kind of my point too. I truly do appreciate Mackey's concern here. I do. I mean, it's hard to attract someone when you're saying, look, I don't know if I can pay you. I get that. That's not lost on me. What is confusing to me is how is this solving the problem? Because if the concern here is, okay, we're going to bring someone in, we to assure them that we're going to pay them for this year. Well, if I'm the applicant, I'm not uprooting my family and moving them to Marshfield when I don't know that there's going to be, funding for 2026 or 2027. And so to me, this request seems to me like they're just indicating to us that they don't have any faith in the council. And we've had a long-standing relationship with Mackey for how long now? I can't even count that high, but it's been a long time. And for them to ask us to play games here, just move it from one to another, it just seems a little insulting, to be honest with you. Especially when it's something that doesn't solve the problem. If this was something like Ms. Tompkins brought up, where it was a contract or something like that, which would solve the issue entirely, different story. This here seems like it's just moving funds from one to the other here. So it's a little troublesome that this is something that's been asked for us. This is the third time we're discussing it. And once again, it doesn't solve the problem that Mackey's identified. And I guess as long as I'm up here talking, have we done this before? Have we transferred money from the contingency to a 205 at the request of a non-governmental agency for funding?
No, as far as I'm aware, and I've been here for 14 years, there's never been a scenario like the one we're talking about tonight.
Okay. Yeah, I just don't, I'll leave it here before I rant and rave anymore, but I once again, I just don't see the utility in this. I don't see why we're asked to do this. And I'll briefly put one foot on my soapbox and get off here. I do find it a little troublesome when people ask the city for money and funding, and it seems like it's an afterthought and a guaranteed and an assumption that we're going to fund this stuff. That shouldn't be taken as I'm not in support of Mackey, but I'm not in support of transferring this from the contingency fund that's already earmarked for this position to the 205 fund because they don't believe they can get 7 votes out of council. I'm sorry, I just can't support that here tonight.
Alderman Correa.
I just want to say there's an obvious need for economic development and there's a void in the city for it. I think the chamber is ready to do this. They have over 10 applicants for this position. We're already not going to pay the January cost because you probably wouldn't be able to bring anyone in. So we're talking $43,000, a track record from Mackey and the position that Karen Olson held of nothing but fabulous work. If this is their ask, I think we should go ahead and fund this and move on ourselves and see what the chamber can do for us.
Okay.
Go ahead,
I'd
Steve.
just like to make one more comment in response to something that Councilmember O'Reilly said, because I kind of want to dovetail on agreeing with him. Talking about ROI, and I think where we're at right now and where we've been at for a while, and it's really become especially noteworthy now with Karen Olson having stepped aside, we're able to try and gamely field what's going on. We've got Josh Miller doing a good job, 10 hours a week for us on economic development. I've taken on certainly a lot of economic development work myself. What we're not getting now is anything that resembles proactive. And I think that's where you listen to Kayla Thorpe from Ellers and some of the conversation we're having about the importance of economic development. Currently, it's way more reactive than proactive. There's no one like if we had a staff position here or somebody else outside of here that was able to be contacting companies and trying to recruit opportunities. We're just really handling what comes our way to the best of our ability. And some good things have come from that, but it's a lot harder to be, aggressive.
Alderman Weigel?
I'd just like to point out one more time here that we're conflating the issue. The issue here is not, or the question at hand here is not, should we fund or support Mackey? The question is, should we transfer the money out of a contingency fund to the 205 fund? That's the question at hand, not whether we should support Mackey.
Understood.
Alderman Tompkins?
Okay, so just to clarify, if Mackey next week hires someone and they send the bill to City Hall and say, hey, start paying your portion for this person's salary, can this come out of the general fund?
I can't because we don't have an account line item that would accommodate that, in my opinion. Unless it's budget resolution. I mean, we don't do direct spend like that out of contingency, and there's no line item in the 101 budget that would fit this.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions, comments? Okay, and this was a discretion of council. We do have a motion and a second. And one more time, Mike, would you please give us the motion? Microphone, please. Microphone, please. Thank you.
I want to approve the resolution 01-2025.
And Alderman Varsha, you were second that? Absolutely. Okay, would you please vote?
Mrs. Spiros?
No.
Mr. Reigel?
Nay.
That motion fails. On to item P, request to approve resolution number 2025-01, authorizing the assurance and sale of up to $7,739,680 taxable sewage system revenue bonds, Series 2025, and providing for other details and covenants with respect thereto, and approval of related $10,853,015 financial assistance agreement presented by Jennifer Solinsky, Finance Director.
Good evening. So I'll just give you a little bit of background on this project. Beginning in 2023, as were required by the DNR, the city completed a facility plan for the wastewater treatment plant, which with the goal to assess the condition of the sewage system, establish any needs for improvement, and evaluate options to address those needs and identify cost alternatives. In 2010, the DNR released more phosphorus levels of control, and we need to reduce the phosphorus levels in the effluent. And the plant has a permit from the DNR that was issued in 2018 that will expire in 2025. In order to meet the requirements for the next permitting system, the study identified the need for a tertiary filtration system in the plant, as well as improvements at the Northeast Lift Station. Both of those projects are currently in process. So this resolution is only relating to the plant improvements. Project costs, including design, construction, and construction management, are estimated to be around $13 million. Funding sources for this project include wastewater utility fund balance, a focus on energy grant, and a clean water fund loan, which includes a principal forgiveness portion, which is also considered a grant. Construction of this project is well underway, and we're at the point where we have incurred enough expenditures to begin the loan process and close on that loan and enter into an agreement for financial assistance, which is that principal forgiveness component with the DNR. Resolution 2501 authorizes the issuance of up to the $7,739,690 of revenue bonds, which are payable from fees generated at the wastewater facility. The bonds are payable over 20 years with a low interest rate of 2.2% per annum. The payment assistant agreement, which also goes along with the closing of a loan, explains the loan covenants, the principal forgiveness application, and projected payment schedule. Under this agreement, the city is eligible for $3,113,335 worth of principal forgiveness. So with that, I would recommend council approval of Resolution 2025-01, as well as the execution of the agreement for payment assistance.
We have a motion by Alderman Stauber, second by Alderman Tompkins. Any discussion or questions? Seeing none, please vote.
Mrs. Spiros?
Yes.
Mr. Rigel?
Right.
That motion passes. Item Q, request to approve resolution number 2025-03, directing that a referendum for funding in support of hiring and retaining 2 firefighter paramedics be placed on the ballot for the April 1st spring election, presented by Everett Mueller, Fire Chief.
Good evening. This is a resolution we had brought forward at an earlier meeting that was part of the presentation that I'd had. This was looking for the 2 firefighters. I believe it was $256,930 is what we were looking for in that piece. And looking at that fund, I guess we would be asking for the language. Steve, were you able to come up with the language for that?
Yeah, the resolution's in the packet with the ballot language included.
Okay, we'd be asking for approval of that language so we could take that and utilize that in the flyers and all of the presentations that we would be presenting in future times. I believe Steve will be bringing that forward as well as far as the information we need for that presentation that'll come to this group as well.
For what now?
Just to bring the presentation, the flyer and information forward.
Oh, yeah, I mean, we certainly will keep them posted on what's going on with the advertising, the PR and all that stuff. That's what you're asking, yeah.
So tonight we would be asking respectfully for the permission to move forward with that language.
Yeah, and just to add to that, Jennifer's done a great job and working with Jessica as well. The language that we have in the resolution that's in your packet is largely prescribed, really almost entirely prescribed by state law, the format. So we're just really, the numbers have been inserted properly to reflect the impact on the taxes.
We have a motion by Alderman Giles, second by Alderman Tompkins. First, we'll go Alderman Tompkins and then Alderman Spiros.
Thank you. Do we know how much per $100,000 property value this would show up?
I believe that came out to $1.21 per $100,000.
Thank you.
That's per month, and then I believe.
Oh, per month.
Do you have that information on how much it is? I think it's $14 a month, or $12.95 a month.
It would be, if I recall, somewhere very similar to what the street lighting proposal we had before you at one point, a little over $2 a month, I think between $2 or $2.50 a month. So, think, $25 to $30 a month on a $200,000 home.
Okay, but for $100,000 home.
That would be in the $100,000 home. It'd be about $14, I believe, though.
Yeah,
A year?
right. Double that for a $200,000 home.
Okay.
I'm sorry if I said that wrong. I kind of commingled monthly and yearly, but annually for a $200,000 home, it would be roughly between $25 and $30 a month.
Okay, thank you so much.
A year again, a month.
Whatever that
Now I'm doing it to
is.
myself. You know what I mean?
Okay, so for the public, if a house at $100,000 would be $14 a year, $200,000 would be about $25 a year.
Correct.
300,000, about 30.
That's not exact, but it's close.
Okay, thank you so much.
Alderman Spiros?
Thank you. So I'm looking at the documents in the packet, and I'm looking down to number 3. So from the quotes starting under state law until the final quote, which do I see a final quote? Is that the whole question? Because I don't see an ending quote. Is the ending quote supposed to be after the word forward? And is that what's going to appear on the ballot?
Yes, that ending quote was missed on this resolution. It has since been added, and that is the exact wording that would be on the ballot. That is what state prescribed.
Okay. So with that said, I think these ballot questions are always confusing for people. And I think that a lot of times people get to the ballot and they have no idea what a yes vote means or a no vote means. This question is somewhat confusing. But like you said, it's required by law that we do this. So I just want to stress the importance of education prior to this going to the voters, because I think the question, just like all questions, can be very confusing. So I think it's really, really important that people know what they're voting for and what it's going to cost them a year.
Yeah, you make an excellent point, and I've been talking with Everett about that and other staff. We have kind of a team here that's been working together on the referendum. We've got a good piece of time here to do some public education, a little bit ahead of the game of where we were 2 years ago when we ran that campaign with the help of a consultant. So, I mean, we'll be having a lot of stuff out there on social media, website, other types of media, town hall meetings, all those kind of things with the documentation to show what this means.
Okay, Alderman Starbuck. Okay, excuse me, Alderman Spiros. Alderman Starbuck's okay if I let her just finish up?
Yeah,
Thank you. Okay, because he was buzzed in before you, but go ahead and finish.
I'm sorry, just on that topic, Steve, my suggestion is that we involve a lot of our firemen in our advertisements and a lot of our firemen in our education, because they're the ones on the front line, and people like firemen. They like firemen. So I think that we should really look at our marketing strategy for this.
Yeah, a couple of things. First of all, and we work with the city attorney on this too to make sure we stay on the right side of the line. Our PR needs to be information and education, not promotion in the sense of trying to sell it. But we do know that the fire union has talked about, doing its own campaign, and they're not under the same restrictions. So I think you'll see a lot of information coming from that department as to why this would be a positive thing, and it's needed for that department.
Alderman Stauber?
My question is also on point number 3 that Alderman Spiros brought up. The phrase, for the purpose of hiring and retaining 2 additional full-time firefighter paramedics. Did you struggle with that? Because we're really backfilling 2 positions that used to exist. And the way this is written with additional makes it sound like we're increasing the staff, but we're really, the way I understand it, we're just backfilling for 2 positions that we failed to support previously. So how do we land on that verbiage?
I think we're going to make that very clear in all of our materials and discussion with people face to face. It really is just getting us back to the 2021 level. And you're exactly right. You called it perfectly. We're not really increasing from where we were 4 years ago. I don't know if it's possible, for us to amend that language and take additional out and just say hiring 2 firefighter paramedics. Now that I think about it, the way you're saying it, I can see where someone could misconstrue what that means. I don't think it would be false advertising to take that word out, if that's your preference.
Alderman Weigel, and then Alderman Varsho.
Thank you. And just to follow up on Mr. Stauber's point, I think that we probably should take another look at that word additional on there, especially knowing that we have a lot of money riding on the hiring of safety personnel and firefighters. I'd hate to have us accidentally put ourselves in a position where we risk, a seven-figure amount of money coming from the state over one word. So I'd probably just, I don't know if a motion is necessary, but refer it to the city attorney to have him review that to make sure whether that word should remain or not.
I think you should. I mean, yeah, I'm looking at the city attorney right now, and the reality is it would be two more that we have on staff right now and two more that we've had on staff for quite a while. That's why I thought the word additional made sense, but whether or not it's misleading to not do that, I don't know.
I'm looking at the clerk. This wasn't derived at by accident. And you don't have them funded. So if you're going to add that in, you almost have to add in the two additional that were funded back in 20. So now you got this kind of thing where are you benefiting? And again, that's a dangerous word because we cannot really, in terms of openly support this. Obviously you want to word this in such a way that it has an outcome that you're looking at, but we can't be promoting it by specific wording. On the other hand, that's what you'd have to do, and you run the risk that it goes in a different direction because the wording becomes so long-winded that somebody just looks at it and doesn't know what to do or doesn't read it all. So that's the real crux. You can't not specify that these people are not there and you're adding them on. That's why that additional is there. Could you add in word that says additional that would bring us up to what we had in 2021? Yes, you can. That's a tough choice. And it's not really a legal question as much as it is in terms of, where is that what you want to do in terms of strategizing how to word this in a way that people will better understand it, but do you run the risk of losing your audience? And I don't mind looking at it, but that's my opinion on it. And my concern is that making that decision isn't a legal one. It's really a strategy one, and you could lose your audience.
Go ahead, Jess.
I just need to add that we do need to adopt this resolution tonight if we are going to referendum in April. I do need to have this language in my hand absolutely no later than next Tuesday at 5 p.m. So if you do not adopt tonight and wish to move forward with a referendum, we would be looking at a special meeting between now and then, or we would be delaying this referendum until the 2026 election year and the 2027 budget, as we do not have fall elections this year. So just putting that out there. Whatever decisions you make tonight, we're either moving forward or we're going to a special meeting, however you decide.
Alderman Tompkins?
Okay, thank you. So, Mr. Wolfgram, I'm hearing from you that we have to leave the word in additional because we don't have them right now. Is that correct?
I think that would be the right way to be explaining this. I mean, and then keep in mind that if you don't do that, and now you have someone out there that may be against this, you literally could have someone campaigning against you because they don't like the wording or they feel like it's misleading. So you need to be careful. And I do think that they're not presently there. So you're explaining that you're getting those two additional people.
Alderman Stauber, then Alderman Spiros.
I'm not opposed to wordsmithing tonight, and I'm just wondering if we could insert the phrase to return to 2019 levels. And so it looks like for the purpose of returning to 2019 levels by hiring and retaining 2 additional full-time firefighter paramedics. I'm worried about that person who shows up at the booth and reads this for the first time or maybe reads it the day before. And the way it's written, it just sounds like we're beefing up the department.
Alderman Spiros, and then we'll come back to another. Go ahead, Alderman Spiros.
Disregard.
Okay. Okay, so what is our next move?
Can I just clarify? I've long been saying 2021. Maybe 2019, it was the same staffing level, but 2021's been my reference point for the previous staffing level for quite a while.
2022, I believe, is when we lost the staffing. So
Okay.
you could say 2021, that would be the last year we had them, so that would be still accurate.
Alderman Starbird is requesting to amend,
It's not,
and,
it's not working.
and if you would please
Do I?
give
have
us
the
your
floor?
amendment. Yeah, go ahead.
So I would amend the language.
Yeah, we have a motion in a second, Rebecca. Okay, go ahead.
So I would amend the language of point number 3, where it has the phrase, for the purpose of hiring and retaining 2 additional full-time firefighters. I would change that to, for the purpose of returning to 2021 staffing levels by hiring and retaining 2 full-time firefighter paramedics. Just drop that word additional.
Do we have a second
Because-
to that amendment motion? Second, Alderman Tompkins?
And if I could, Mayor,
Yes, sir.
if, then the word additional really becomes redundant. If you're, returning to, well, maybe it depends on how you read it, but
That's the problem.
yeah.
I mean, we could read that and say that, oh, we don't have any, we need more.
Yeah. Well, if you say returning to 2021 levels, and you're hiring, you're promoting, or you're asking to hire or create 2 positions, you don't need to say additional opinion. It's kind of said within, without that word additional. It's redundant, if you will. So again, the phrase would be, for the purpose of returning to 2021 levels by hiring and retaining 2 full-time firefighter paramedics.
So, like wording levels, we're just, yeah, you're talking about staffing levels. Staffing levels. I think you have to have something in there that says what you mean by levels. I don't think that's an obvious, somebody coming in from the outside, and you're talking about the public now. And that's why this is so difficult and critical, and why you may have looked at these and again, looked at that these haven't been successful. You're talking about people who, this is, for many of them, is gonna be the first time they've ever seen this or heard of this or have any idea.
Right.
So at the very least, if you use that language, I would recommend that you say staffing levels, staff level.
Okay, all right. So just for clarification, then, thank you. For the purpose of returning to 2021 staffing levels by hiring and retaining 2 full-time firefighter paramedics would be my amendment.
And is that concurrent with you, Alderman Tompkins?
Yes.
Thank you. Any other discussion? Seeing none, please vote on the amendment.
Mrs. Spiros?
Yes.
Mr. Rigel?
Aye.
The amendment passes. Now we go back to the original motion. Any other comments, questions? We do have Alderman Giles and Alderman Tompkins motion and second. Any other discussion or, yes, thank you, Rebecca. Seeing none, please vote.
Mrs. Spiros?
Yes.
Mr. Rigel?
Aye.
That motion passes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Everett.
Have a good night.
Oh, excuse me, Chief Mueller. Item R, update on strategic planning decision on next steps, including possible setting 1 or more dates for special meetings presented by Steve Barg, City Administrator.
Well, thank you, Mayor. I think we're all excited to be moving into the strategic planning. We've talked before about how that will help us in prioritizing and planning for the future, some of the challenges that we have ahead of us. So on a Friday morning, we had a meeting here. Lois was with us, and Councilmember Werman, Councilmember Stauber. We met with Dan Foth. He is the person we're going to be working with from UW Extension. He has considerable experience in helping communities do strategic planning over a number of years. He's very good at it and is skilled. You can tell just by talking with him for a few minutes that he knows his stuff. So we met here, and he walked through what he'd like to see as considered as a framework. And, you know, when I was thinking about what this might look like, I was thinking about a longer process, more meetings, maybe some of you were too. He's looking at more of a three-step type of thing in terms of the number of meetings we have. Anyway, here's the way it would go. This kind of a high-level approach. I'm not covering everything he talked about, but we begin with groundwork, getting some information from me, from others, from department heads, to get a sense of what we have, what we do, what some of the budget works, how the capital improvement plan works, some of the services provided by our department, so we can get a handle around what we offer here today and what we expend for those particular programs and services, kind of getting himself up to speed. The issue we talked about a little bit was the fact that we have elections coming up on April 1st. And we may well have different people sitting in this room. So the thought was maybe to wait until after that to really dive into the strategic planning itself. What he's looking at doing is 3 sessions. 2 of them would be 6-hour sessions with lunch in the middle. They'd be during the day, looking at 2 Saturdays. The first one would be working on vision, mission, and values. And then just kind of sort of a look at 5 years out. What do we want to be? What do we want to look like? Just kind of brainstorming future planning opportunities for the community as we head down the road into the coming 5 years. There'd be some small group discussions and a lot of sharing of ideas at that time. The second one, also a 6-hour, including lunch type of affair. We would be reviewing and revising the vision, mission, and values, seeing if we want to make any changes. Be reviewing and revising a list of 5-year goals that we want to try to work toward. And then getting into what can be done that first year or two. What are the items that are high priority that we want to get done in the first 12 to 24 months? And then review and prioritize the list more tightly. And then talk about it, creating an implementation plan. And that's what it's all about. I think we talk about everything from, the Weinbrenner or plan or the Second Street corridor, all these kind of things. It's all about whether you can take the plan and put it into action and get working on accomplishing the goals and objectives. The third day would be a shorter event. It would be 3 hours. Purpose of that would be to review and get feedback from others that weren't part of the process. Some community leaders, for example, community organizations. You might be talking Main Street, Mackey. You might be talking about business people in the community, and let them see the plan, give comment, some feedback to maybe help make final adjustments as we head toward a final adoption of a strategic plan for the city of Marshfield. So I realized, and Daniel realized when he said this, that summer's not always thought of as being ideal. People have vacations and those kind of things. And some people, including staff are being requested to be part of the first 2 parts of that, well, actually all parts of the process, but the first 2 as well, at the department and division head level, to be interacting with council. But he's looking at 9 to 3 on Saturday, 2 Saturdays during the first half of the summer, most likely. If we can get dates that work for enough people to do that, realizing we probably can't get everybody. But that's the framework in general. We can talk about it. Now we can talk about it later. It's your plan, your process that we want to be adopting. But he's doing that elsewhere. I think he's doing that upcoming now, or has done it recently in Portage County. That type of framework has worked well for him and for the communities and counties that he's worked with in the past. So take any questions, comments, or thoughts about that process. I'm not going too deeply into the weeds, but that's the guts of it that he would like to move forward with us on.
Seeing no questions, Alderman Stauber, boy, right under the gun, lucky man.
Right under the
Alderman
gun,
Stauber?
Yeah, no questions, Mayor, but I just wanted to echo what Administrator Barg said. And speaking on behalf of Derek Berman and myself, who participated in the introductory meeting, I was very pleased with what Mr. Foth put on the table. I think the framework will fit very well and with what we need, and it'll have an outcome that I think will be very helpful. It's a bit of a sacrifice when you think about giving up a Saturday in the middle of summer, but I'm confident that it would be an excellent opportunity and really help guide future councils. I won't be around, but I'd be glad to help out as a scribe, which I mentioned during the meeting. So I think it'll be a very exciting session. So, thank you.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I mean, we did talk about the fact that we've had meetings before where we could get here at 5 o'clock at night and work until 9 or 10, but I think we kind of came to the conclusion that's not the best approach. People get tired, they're worn out. I also agree with him that the idea of having it over a long period of time, an hour here, 2 hours here, is usually not received very well, and you lose the continuity of the process. So hopefully this will work for people.
And I too, as the fourth person at that table, will agree with everything that's come forth. And I know it sounds funny to take 2 Saturdays, but it'll be over before you know it. And we'll have something good, concrete to bring back to all of us, which is very exciting. Okay, moving on to item S, appointment of Sierra Steiner Heffernan, 917 West Adler Road, to the Parks, Recreation, and Forestry Committee to complete an unexpired term ending on April of 2026, presented by me, and you have that all in your packet. There's no action this evening. In 2 weeks from now, we will vote on her appointment. Item T, appointment of Zin Rupel, 509 West 11th Street, to the Library Board to complete an unexpired term ending in April of 2027. Again, no action. In 2 weeks, we will vote on that also. That takes care of S and T. Item U, suggested items for further agendas. Seeing none. Item V, adjourn to closed session under Wisconsin Statute, Chapter 19.851E, deliberating or negotiating the purchasing of public properties, the investing of public funds, or conducting other specified public business whenever competitive or bargaining reasons require a closed session. Development agreement revised for project located in TIF District 12 and proposed purchase/development of property located in Daniels Addition. We have a motion by Alderman O'Reilly, second by Alderman Tompkins. Please vote to go into closed session.
Mrs. Spiros?
Yes.
Mr. Reigel?
All right.
We're in closed session. We will take a 5-minute recess.
discussion was on the agreement of a revised development agreement with Next Gen Agronomy LLC for the sale and development of 4 acres in Yellowstone Industrial Park.
We have a motion on the floor by Alderman Tompkins, and your motion is?
My motion is to approve the updated contract that has new updated language with Next Gen Agronomy.
We have a second by Alderman Varsha, and you agree with that?
Yes.
Any discussion or comments or questions? Seeing none, please vote.
Mrs. Spiros?
Yes.
Mr. Rigel?
Aye.
That motion passes. Thank you. And who would like to adjourn the meeting? Motion by Alderman Varsha, second by Alderman Coran. Please vote to adjourn the meeting.
Mrs. Spiros?
Yes.
Mr. Rigel?
Aye.
Meeting's adjourned. Thank you.